Good morning and welcome to Heart of the Shepherd as we continue our chronological study of the Scriptures. We are in the book of Jeremiah, almost at the very end. Our chapter reading today is Jeremiah chapter 50, and our title, Warning, No Nation is Too Big to Fail. Let me say that again. Warning, no nation is too big to fail. Jeremiah chapter 50. Well, I have found the book of Jeremiah to be an incredible record of the Lord's long-suffering with his people and a testimony to his faithfulness to his covenant promises. Now, you and I have followed Jeremiah's life from his calling and ordination as God's prophet to Judah and the nations in Jeremiah chapter 1 to the fall of Judah, the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple, and then his exile in Egypt. That's where we find him today as we continue our study of his prophecies concerning the Gentile nations. Now, throughout his life, we have seen that Jeremiah was a model of courage and faithfulness for all who aspire to serve the Lord. Well, Jeremiah chapter 50 is one of the great crossroads in history, for it is the prophecy of the vengeance of the Lord against Babylon. Now, Jeremiah 50 is an incredible passage foretelling the destruction of Babylon. Now, what a striking prophecy this must have been to Jeremiah. Much like my country, the United States, Babylon was the lone superpower in its day and would have seemed invincible to the prophet. The prophecy against Babylon is recorded beginning in chapter 50, verses 1 through 3. Now, Babylon, again, would bring under heel all the nations of the Middle East. Nevertheless, Jeremiah was tasked with declaring among the nations the demise of Babylon, saying, quote, Babylon is broken. Baal is confounded. Merodach is broken in pieces. Her idols are confounded. Her images are broken in pieces. In other words, all the idols that Babylon looked to and worshipped would all be crushed. Now, none would come to the aid of that great city, and its idols would prove as weak as they were lifeless. Jeremiah's prophecy foretold a coalition of nations out of the north would come against the great city, bringing desolation in chapter 50, and you'll see that in verse 3, 9, and then 41 through 42. Now, from history and the scriptures, we know that the coalition of nations would be the Medes and Persians under the leadership of King Cyrus. Now, the book of Daniel gives us the record of that fateful night when Babylon would be overthrown and the great city would become unfit for man and beast, even as it is today. I'm looking forward to that study with you when we come to the book of Daniel. Now, the prophecy of Israel's liberation or redemption and homecoming is recorded in Jeremiah 50 and verses 4 through 10. Now, Jeremiah prophesied how the, quote, children of Israel would be liberated by the nations out of the north, the Medes and the Persians, and would return to their own land. That is, Israel and Judah, the Jews, would return to their own land. Now, we read, quote, verse 4, going and weeping, they, Israel, Judah, the Jews, shall go and seek the Lord their God. In verse 5, they shall ask the way to Zion, Zion being the mount upon which the temple and the city of Jerusalem was built. They shall ask the way to Zion with their faces thitherward, saying, in verse 5, come, let us join ourselves to the Lord in a perpetual covenant that shall not be forgotten. Well, with the tenderness of a shepherd, the Lord looked upon his people in verse 6 as lost sheep whose shepherds led them astray. Now, the shepherds would have been the politicians as well as the religious leaders of Israel and Judah, which would have meant the priests and the prophets. Well, according to the Lord, they had been led astray by their shepherds. They had, in verse 7, turned from their covenant, that is Israel and Judah with the Lord, turned from their covenant and became prey to their adversaries. Now the Lord, in verse 8, urged the Jews to flee Babylon, warning that he was raising an enemy against Chaldea, the Chaldea being another name for Babylon, and that Babylon, the city, would be a spoil. Then consider verses 11 through 46. And here we have the declaration of God's vengeance against Babylon. Now, as we read verse 11, Babylon's fate was sealed, for that nation had, quote, rejoiced and been destroyers of Israel and Judah. You see, God had not forgotten those who had abused, oppressed, and persecuted his people, even as he will not forget those who do so today. The ruins of that great city of Babylon would become a monument to the Lord's vengeance, even as it is today in the desert. Never has been rebuilt. The city would become, we read in verse 13, wholly desolate. In verse 23, Babylon would become a desolation among the nations. You see, no nation, great or small, can stand against the Lord God of hosts when he has declared in verse 31, I am against thee. Well, Babylon had defied God, and now he would take vengeance on that nation. Well, the fall of Babylon was prophesied to be so great that we read in verse 46 that the earth is moved by her fall. Well, a closing thought today, and that is that the Lord keeps his promise. Though Israel and Judah were scattered among the nations, God would not forget his people. In fact, in verse 34, we read that he warned the nation that Israel's, quote, Redeemer is strong, and the Lord of hosts is his name. You know, I've heard in the 21st century leaders who employ the adage, too big to fail. Well, I would say to them, oh, foolish men, no nation or people is so great they can stand when God has set himself against them. May you and I, as God's people, truly be on our knees calling out to the Lord for our nation. But should our nation continue down its path, surely we should expect that we too, like Babylon, will be judged. Well, may God find us faithful in that fateful hour. God bless you, and bye-bye.